let's talk about how this course will look like for you. Each section has some sort of actionable steps that you are able to follow, such as building websites and sample projects. And everything we use in this course is a tool that companies use in real life. They're the best of the best. So let's look at the course outline. The first part will be an introduction, some basic concepts to get us familiar with the web and how it works. We will start off with how the internet works. What is the history of these technologies? We're going to talk about the history of the web browsers, and I'll actually have you understand the underlying concepts of the internet and how the technologies we have now have come to be where they are. And then we're going to learn HTML5, finally building our first website. We'll also get into some advanced HTML where we're going to build some complex forms and get you really, really good at this technology. We will then move into CSS, which allows us to style our websites and make them beautiful. Afterwards, we'll get into advanced CSS and using CSS3 features like transitions and gradients. In the advanced CSS section, we'll create a background generator project that is going to be a lot of fun. Once we've mastered how to work with websites using HTML and CSS, we'll then start learning about Bootstrap 4, templates, and building your own startup landing page that accepts emails and will actually store the emails of users as people who are interested in your startup. A very useful skill that you will definitely need in your career, or if you have a business idea that you want to pursue. We will also dive into newer features of CSS like Flexbox and my favorite, CSS Grid, and get really, really good at doing responsive layouts with CSS. Finally, we finish off part 1 with career of a developer. What does a career of a developer actually entail? What are the salaries? What are the differences between a software developer, mobile developer, software engineer, full stack developer? We're going to cover all of that. And we're also going to talk about the future trends and what skills do you need in the future. From part 1, we move to our next section. In here, we'll start to introduce JavaScript and learn concepts that allow us to learn a real programming language, and the most popular programming language, which is JavaScript. We then move to DOM manipulation, where we'll actually use JavaScript to create actions and behaviors to our websites so they're interactive. And then finally, we're going to learn some advanced JavaScript concepts so that we can use JavaScript to control the machines around us. Now, just knowing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is not good enough, and you won't be able to grow in your role and command a higher salary just with those 3 skills. I'm going to be teaching you these things coming up because these are the things you should know so that you are miles ahead of the rest. So after the JavaScript section, we're going to start getting into the command line and working with the terminal. We then learn about developer environments, and I'll actually show you what my developer environment on my computer looks like when I'm working. We'll be setting up our own computers with all the tools necessary of a real-life developer, so you can use the same setup when you go and work for somebody or for yourself. We will then learn about Git and GitHub, probably the most important tools of a developer. And I'll show you how teams work with these technologies to create collaborative software. We then get into a fun section, which is a day in the life of a developer. I'll show you what a day-to-day from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., what it looks like and what tools you'll use. I will take you through a sample day at a tech company, just so that on your first day at the job, you won't be surprised. We will then jump to NPM and NPM scripts, a way for developers to share their code, and it's going to open up a whole world of possibilities. In this section, we are also going to create our own customizable portfolio project. So moving forward, you can add the projects from this course to your website and have it as your online resume. Finally, we finish off part 2 with React.js. You'll learn the library that companies like Netflix, Facebook, and Instagram use to build fast, scalable applications. This is one of the highest in-demand skills in the industry. It's so much fun, and I'm really, really excited about that section. From part 2, we'll move on to the world outside of just the front end. We're going to learn about HTTP, JSON, and Ajax, something that will open up a world of possibilities. We'll learn about the backend basics and what backend developers do. And then finally, I'll introduce you to some APIs, what APIs are, and definitely some really interesting APIs that are out there. This section is really going to open up your world from just being a front-end developer that is really good at building websites to somebody that can create really dynamic applications, and it will set us up for part 4. This is where it gets really, really fun. We're going to start working on our final project called SmartBrain. And we're going to start off by working on the front end. That is using CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and React. We're going to build an image recognition app that's going to be really, really fun. You submit a URL, and using a machine learning API, we're going to detect to see if in that photo there's a face, and then detect where that face is with the square box. We're going to create a sign-in form, a registration form, and it's going to be really, really impressive. Something that you're going to be able to use in your portfolio and impress future employers or clients. We then take a break from the SmartBrain project to introduce you to Node.js and Express. This is where I show you how to build a server, how to create a RESTful API, so that when we get into the next section, the SmartBrain server section, we build our own server, so that we're actually able to communicate with the server over HTTP and sign into our app, sign out, have profiles, and do all sorts of really interesting things. From there, we again take a break and learn about databases, a really complex topic, but I'm going to make it simple for you to understand how they work. And in the next section, we're actually going to create our own database using Postgres and connect it to our server, so that at the end, you'll have a fully working app that has a front-end client website, a back-end server, and a server that's working with a database. Pretty much a full-fledged application. And finally, we're going to deploy and launch that application so you know exactly how to put a real-life app that is secure and won't get hacked on the web. And don't worry, I'm going to provide all files for you throughout the sections so that you can just add them to your portfolio, or you can work along the videos as well. Depending on what your learning style is, you can follow along whichever way works best for you. And at the end of the course, I'm also going to have a quick little section of some of my favorite resources to get hired, some of my own advice on finding a job of your dreams. By the end of this course, you're going to learn the skills that will allow you to apply for jobs in the following roles: web developer, software developer, front-end developer, JavaScript developer, or a full-stack developer. You're going to learn the technologies that are actually being used behind tech companies. You're going to be able to build your own websites and applications. But most importantly, you're going to master fundamental concepts in web development so that it sets you up for a bright, long career. I also want to make this course interactive. I'll be making videos of student projects and what others have built in this course like you. I'll also have Q&A videos where, based on the most popular questions or the most popular topics, I'm going to create new videos as they are suggested. We have a lot to cover, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's get started. Hello! That was a little bit excessive, but I'm very, very excited to start the course. So in this section, we're going to be talking about browsing the web. It's the first part in the how the internet works section. And some of you are thinking right now, whoa, Andre, like, come on. I know how the internet works. Let's get to the heavy, technical stuff. But this is something that actually took me quite a few years to learn. And I see a lot of people just skimming the surface of this stuff without fully understanding how everything works together. Without having those foundations, it's actually very, very difficult to think about performance, optimizing your site, and so on and so on. So we're going to start off very, very basic, and we're going to learn something that it took me many years to learn. And once I figured this out, everything clicked. So just hang in there. Trust me, I promise you'll learn something new in this section. And we're going to be talking about browsing the web. We have over here a laptop, and we have our web browser, let's say Google Chrome. And we typically like to say, go to Google, and we're going to visit Google. So we type in google.com, and well, what happens technically when we do that? When we enter google.com, we press enter on our keyboard. We ask a question. Who's this google.com fellow? And that question gets asked all the way down to our ISP. ISP is Internet Service Provider, and I put a $ up here, just so you know those are the people that you pay so you can have internet. So if you're in the States, that's Cogeco, Verizon. If you're in Canada, that would be Bell or Rogers. Or, depending on your country, you have your big companies that make a lot of money from internet usage. So they get that request and they send that off to something called the DNS server, so domain name servers. And we'll get into that later on in the course. So don't worry too much about it, but essentially it's a phone book that has the list of all these URLs like google.com, and it has the addresses of them. So exactly like a phone book, they know where google.com is. So they say, hey, I don't know Mr. Google.com personally, but I do know his address. So you should go check him out. So they send off that request back through the ISP, and the website or the web browser, Google Chrome in this case, gets 172.217.723. All right, cool, but nothing's showing up yet. There's no google.com. I can't do any searches yet. Okay, we received what we call an IP address. So think of this as something that every single computer has one. Anything that's connected to the internet has its own address. So the laptop that I'm working on right now has an IP address. Your laptop or computer has an IP address. So this IP address allows the internet to work essentially. It knows our location, our address. So what we do now with google.com, we know this IP address. The browser sends off another request to the Google servers, and it knows where the Google servers are because we have this address. So we go seek it out, and you can think of servers as computers essentially. My laptop could be a server, your computer could be a server. Servers are essentially computers that are sometimes in basements or in huge server farms, and they have a piece of software running that, just like at a restaurant where a server brings you food, it knows how to send you files when you request for them. So we send this off, and the Google servers say, oh yeah, no problem. Let me give you my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we'll get into what those are later on in the course, but think of them as just text files. They're text files that Google is going to send to the browser so we can have Google working. So let me just minimize this and show you what it's doing. So we're copying these files, and Google server is saying, yeah, no problem. Thanks for asking for Google. Here it is. And the web browser receives the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if we go to the next section, boom, we have google.com, and everything's working. Now, that sounded like a whole bunch of stuff that happened in between. And when we're on the internet, everything is quite fast. But yeah, underneath the hood, all of that is happening. And it's crazy to think how fast everything works. Don't take my word for it. Let's just check this process that I'm not just making stuff up for you. If what we learned was correct, technically, we can skip this process, right? I mean, if we know the address of Google, can we just, go into this directly and just, instead of putting in google.com, just put in this in our search bar and it automatically goes to the Google servers? Well, let's try it out. Let's open up Google here. And ooh, what a pretty picture. All right, so we go to google.com. Nothing crazy here. And that's great. But what if I, instead of that, I put in the IP address? So 172, there's no way I could remember this address, so I've done this before. And I press enter. Look at that, google.com. So as you can see, I'm not lying. It's what's happening. The IP address gets sent to the Google servers. Google servers send us a few files so that we can finally load google.com. In the next section, we're going to do something fun. We're going to break a bit of Google and toy around with the website again to show you how cool all of this technology is. See you in the next one. Bye-bye. Welcome back. In the last section, we talked about how we have google.com, and if we enter an IP address, we essentially get all these files from Google. So if we look back at the diagram that we had, we see here that the Google servers just send us a couple of files, which are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Again, something that we'll cover later on. But for now, based on that knowledge, we should be able to break Google. So let's play with something. If you open up Google Chrome and you go into View, then Developer, then Developer Tools, you're going to have a screen over here that pops up. You might want to move it up and down just so you can see better. Let me just scroll this down a bit so you can see. You'll see over here that there's a little icon on the left with a pointer and a window. If you click on that and now go to the website, you'll see it selects a bunch of different things. So it's just an element selector. So let's just click on this. So when I click on this, it takes me to the part of the HTML file that essentially tells Google to put in Google search here. So based on that, we can do something fun. We can get the value over here of Google search and let's change it to Andre search. Press enter. Look at that. We now just changed Google to have Andre search over here. That's very, very cool. I want you to play around with that and see what you can do. For example, if I now select this and I'm just like, I don't want this, I'm going to press the delete key and just delete it. Look at that. I can delete that. Okay, I don't like that either. I'm going to press delete on that as well. And let's see. You know what? I want the entire website. I want this entire body thing gone. Delete. Look at that. We just completely deleted Google. Now, you must be freaking out. What happened? Am I going to get sent to jail? I just deleted Google. Well, no, not really. Press enter and Google is back. Now, why is that? Well, if we go back to our diagram, we have Google servers and we were playing around with one of these files and we just modified it. We essentially just said delete, delete. So Google was gone. But when I made that request again, Google servers, no problem. We have these files. They send these files all over again back to the server. Hopefully that made sense to you. We see that the browser essentially is a tool, a piece of software that can receive files from servers and it knows how to read them so that, look at that, we get pretty Google and we can type in all the searches that we want in the world. All right, let's get to the next section where we talk about the internet backbone. See you in the next one. Bye-bye. Hey there, welcome back. All right, if you thought so far everything's been really, really cool, well, things are going to get a lot cooler. We're going to be talking about the internet backbone. So we recognize this because I've been talking about it for the last couple of lessons. But some of you may have had a question that is, what do the arrows mean? I mean, it's kind of like magic, right? I just told you that we send off the IP address to the servers. The server responds with some files, but this is just magic. Like, what do these arrows mean? So we're going to talk about that in this lesson. And we're going to do that with this really, really fuzzy diagram that I found online from this website. It's not the clearest picture, but it actually has some really important things. So I want to use that to demonstrate to you what the internet backbone is. So as some of you know, the way we connect in our homes, at a coffee shop, or at work is we usually have Wi-Fi, or maybe sometimes we still have people that are using Ethernet cables and connecting through those. But for now, let's just focus on the fact that we have a home and we have Wi-Fi, and this Wi-Fi essentially gives us internet from the router. You can see this little person over here working hard with a router next to him. And this router is connected all the way to something called a modem. And this is something that if you ever signed up for internet or changed providers, you most likely had somebody come to your house and install something. And that's this box over here that essentially allows the ISP, the internet service provider, this big building over here, we remember that, to connect to it. So this modem has these signal towers that transmit signals of, google.com, and it receives these messages. And then this is why I picked this image, just because I think it's incredible. You see this wire that is connected all the way to the ISP, and then the internet service provider, the ISP, is connected to this magical blue cable that is the internet backbone. And something that's really important in this image is the fact that there's Wi-Fi, which is over the air, but at the end of the day, everything is kind of connected through cables. So some of you, or many of you, or all of you might be wondering, what the hell is this internet backbone thing? Sounds cool, but this kind of vague. So I found a really, really cool thing that we can do together. I'll post this website in the notes after this lesson, but if you go over here, you actually see the internet backbone. So let's say we're in Brazil and we wanted to search google.com. Well, from Brazil, from our home, through Wi-Fi, it connects to our router, to our modem, and then all the way to our internet service provider. Let's say it's internet service providers over here. And then through cables, it connects all the way to, let's say, this point over here. And let's say for now that the Google servers are located somewhere in Portugal over here. Well, that signal of me looking for that IP address of Google and looking for those Google files is going to go through this submarine cable. Yeah, you heard that right. It's a physical cable that goes at the bottom of the seafloor from Brazil all the way to Portugal, where the Google servers are. And then the Google server says, yep, I got those files, here they are, and sends it all the way back through the ISP, all the way back to our house. Isn't that cool that there's physical cables that are connecting and creating this internet? So, there are times where somebody destroys or something happens where these cable connections are cut off and you sometimes lose internet connection that way. But yeah, the internet backbone is literally just this network all over the world of connected cables so that we can transfer these files all over the world. And just to show you how insane this is, somebody from the Opti project over here, I got this off of Wikipedia, mapped out in, I believe this was in 2015, just 30% of the network. And you can see over here that each one of these dots is an IP address. So a computer that is connected to another computer that is connected to another computer. And that's the internet. The internet is just all these connected computers that are just transferring files between each other. And as web developers, and this is the coolest thing, and that's why I just think everybody should be a web developer, because it's so cool. You're allowing this to happen. You're allowing this transferring of files from one computer to another, transferring knowledge from Brazil to Portugal and all over the world. And you get to be part of it. You get to be part of this network and you get to evolve. When this picture of the internet came to me, I knew that this was the career for me. So hopefully that gets you excited. In the next section, I'm going to show you something really cool, traceroute, before we finish up the lesson and we get into the next sections. So hope that was cool. See you in the next one. Bye-bye. Hello, welcome back. We mentioned in the last lesson that we're going to be talking about traceroute. What is that? Well, I just wanted to finally get the entire picture of the internet across, and I think this is the best way to do it. Now, if you're on a Mac, you're going to press Command Space and look for a program that comes with your Mac called Terminal, and you're going to press Enter and you're going to get this. So it's an application that all Macs have. If you're on a Windows machine, it's called Command Prompt, and in the exercise right after this lesson, I will show you instructions on how to access that as well. We're going to talk about traceroute. And if you remember, we spoke about this image of all these connected things happening and going to the internet backbone, and then google.com finally sends us the files back to our house. And you can actually monitor how that's going to work using traceroute. So if we type in traceroute, and on Windows machine, it's actually traceRT. But for now, we'll just go traceroute. And you can request for whatever website you want. So let's go with google.com. I press enter, and yep, look at that. It gave me a whole bunch of hops that it did. So you can see 1 through 9 here. So it did 9 hops. So that means 9 stops to this address at 172.171.14. So again, that looks like the IP address. So again, let's always test our experiments here. If I put that in and press enter, we should get google.com. Let's see. Look at that, google.com. So that's a fun little way of you to see where your requests go, and you can monitor, you can see all these IP addresses are different computers that are trying to locate the Google servers. So go ahead in the next section, there's a little exercise. You can play around with this and just see where all your requests go all over the world. I think it's very, very cool. We're going to finish up in the next section with some fundamentals and what we can do with this knowledge that we have to actually become really good web developers. So see you in the next section. Bye-bye. Welcome back. Good job, you've made it this far. And you're probably asking yourself, Andre, this has been really good, really informative, but where's the coding? I want to start building some websites. And I know, we'll get there, don't worry. But without even realizing it, you just learned some really, really important fundamental skills and something that will take you very, very far in the career of a web developer, because now you know how to improve website performance without a single line of code. And just so you know, we're going to get a little silly here. We're actually going to make sure that you remember these fundamental skills every time throughout these lessons. There's going to be chunks and very important lessons. And to symbolize how important they are, I'm going to get Jean-Claude Van Damme's help. So again, this is an important lesson. This is an important fundamental web developer concept. So Jean-Claude Van Damme, how important is it? All right, so as you can see, very important concept. And what is it? Well, like I said, without writing a single line of code, you now know how to improve a website's performance. So let's think about this. There's three things. We send google.com, we talk to Google servers, and we get these files back. So just looking at this and looking at what you've learned so far, what's one thing that would make sure that this process would be fast? Let's look at the first one. I'm going to give you a second to think. Hopefully you get it. The first one is location of the server. We saw how big the internet backbone is. So if the servers are really, really close to you, let's say you're in the States and the servers are just a couple of kilometers away, that hop is going to be really, really fast versus if it's all the way across the globe. So location of the server is important. And we'll talk about these and how big companies use these to their advantage later on. So that makes sense. Let's look at the next one. So the next one is how many trips. So hopefully, ideally, we just have one trip to the Google servers and Google servers send us all the files that we need back. But as we know, there's new pages, there's searches. So this communication with Google is back and forth, back and forth. And the less trips we have, the faster that we'll be able to get the files. So how many trips? And then finally, size of files. Again, if this HTML file or CSS file or JavaScript file is massive and it's 100 megabytes, well, that's going to be a lot slower to transfer over the internet than it is if it was just a couple of kilobytes. So there it is. These three things are something that you'll take with you, and you'll realize that every time you're building an application, a website, you're going to be thinking about these things. And these are going to help you make sure that you have a performant, fast website. And we're going to take these with us as we go on throughout the course. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. And welcome back. In this final video, I want to show you what this course is all about, what we're learning in this course, and what we're going to be able to do at the end. You may have heard the term full stack developer, front-end developer, back-end developer. And looking at this diagram, you're starting to recognize that HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you see React in there. We'll get to that. Don't worry about it. But that's what a front-end developer does. The front-end developer is the person who makes sure that when we open up the browser and go to google.com, that we see Google. We see it nice and pretty, laid out beautifully, has a search bar, and essentially anything that a user sees, the front-end developer does. And that is using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and a few other tools. The backend developer, that's the person that works with the server, makes sure that when a browser speaks to it, it serves up those files, and it uses technology such as Node.js, Express.js, which we're going to get into. And then that server is going to talk also to a database. Again, we haven't really discussed that too much, but don't worry, there's going to be a section on it, and that's going to use PostgreSQL, and we're actually going to be learning that as well. So we want to build you up as a full stack developer to be able to work with all these technologies so that everything revolving around a web application you're able to build. So get excited. You're going to learn all of this. It looks overwhelming, but trust me, just like this How the Internet Works section, it's all going to make sense. Hello, and welcome back to another video. We actually have a couple of great videos coming up about the history of the web. And you might be asking, again, come on, let's get to coding. But this is really important because we need to understand what problems we had in the past and how we found solutions to those problems and where we are at now. We need to understand what this whole thing of being a web developer means and what problems we're solving and what we did in the past and what we do today. So today we're going to talk about Tim Berners-Lee, the person who invented the World Wide Web in 1989. And I have a picture of him right here. And we're going to talk about him because he's the first web developer. And in order to explain that concept, we need to make a distinction between the internet and the World Wide Web. I have this website that I'll share in the links below. It's really, really good if you kind of want to get a history lesson. But essentially, the internet started off with the ARPANET in 1969, basically a military project, and it was more of a test. It connected a few universities such as Utah, UCLA, and throughout the 70s, the 80s, it kept growing. But there was one problem that they had, and that was essentially for the academics. They needed a way to share documents. And up until the World Wide Web existed, the internet was there, but it was really, really hard for computers to communicate with each other, to share academic papers between each other. Most of the time, each computer had their own way of doing things. You can think of this as languages. So it's kind of like communicating with people from different countries and a language that you don't know. Yeah, sure, you can make it work, but it's very, very difficult. So that was the problem. And Tim Berners-Lee, what he did, and he was working at CERN at the time, he actually created the World Wide Web. And what the World Wide Web is, it's the www that we see whenever we type in google.com over here, is essentially a common language that computers can speak, with the World Wide Web saying, hey, from now on, everybody, if we want to communicate together, if we want to share images, or if you want to share files, let's just have this agreed upon language, agreed upon protocol in order to share these documents together. So that's what it is. The servers, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the browsers all work on top of the World Wide Web. So you can think of it as the internet is your phone and the World Wide Web is Instagram that runs on your phone. So it's essentially a decentralized application. Now, how is Tim Berners-Lee the first web developer? He actually created the first browser and the first server. And later on, we're actually going to talk about what he did with the files over here as well. But he created the very, very first server and web browser, but also the first website. And they actually still have a copy of it. This is the very first website ever. And it's from 1991, and this is what it looked like. He created this ability for people to communicate and link to other documents so that we have this growing knowledge base of the world. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about the history of these files, what they mean, what problem they solved, and how they came to be. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. And welcome back. In the last section, we talked about the World Wide Web and the internet and what the differences were. And then I promised you that we'll finally talk about some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I've been vaguely referencing these files and just told you that they're simple text files for now. But what are they specifically? Well, initially, if you remember, we had Tim Berners-Lee who created the very first website. And this website uses HTML. And HTML, that's the first file over here, is a way for us to just write text on website. And these texts on websites can also have these things called hyperlinks that can link to other parts of the website. So that's what happened in 1991. 1991, we had a way for us to share documents. And this can link to another website, another file, another research paper. But as you can see, it wasn't the prettiest. So in 1995, 1996, two technologies came into being. One was CSS and one is JavaScript. Now, what did they allow you to do? Well, CSS solved the problem of, well, this is nice and all, but it wouldn't be nice if we had some visual aspects. We can toy around with this website and make it look pretty. And then JavaScript said, well, ideally we'll be able to have something like this website where, I can click over here, I can shop now, I can put in my credit card and get these fancy slippers, and I can do all this interactive things with my website. So let's play around with this and try and incorporate from this basic HTML file to add some CSS and JavaScript to this page. The way we're going to do that is we're going to go into View, Developer, and Developer Tools. So you might remember this from our previous lessons. So once you click on that, you'll get this pop up at the bottom of the screen. For some of you, it might be on the right side, but it doesn't matter. You'll get both things. And we've seen this before. And if you look at the top over here, it says HTML. And that's it. HTML is this. It's this file that has this weird syntax that describes how this web page should look in text. So you can see over here, it says the World Wide Web. These are just text. On the right side over here, you'll see something called styles. So styles will actually let you add styles to the website, as the name suggests. And that's what CSS is. If we click on HTML here, and actually let's click on body. Without knowing any CSS or anything, if we define something like color, semicolon, and then let's go blue, it changes the text color to blue. Chrome lets you play around with websites and actually injects some CSS into this HTML. Without knowing any CSS, we can kind of play around, type in a letter, and it will have a drop down. So let's see over here if we can do background color. Let's make it, I'm going to press tab, I'm going to do red. Make the website really, really, well, frankly, pretty ugly. But that's CSS right here. We've just added some CSS to this basic website. Let's turn this red color off because it is not pretty. Okay, so HTML, text and links, CSS, pretty colors. Now, how can we add some JavaScript? So remember, we have 3 files over here. JavaScript came along and said, these are great. We have these beautiful text websites that link to other pages. And we have CSS that can make websites really, really pretty. But would it be nice to have some interactivity, to have drop-down menus to make websites like they are now, interactive? We can actually do this, again, with the developer tools. If you click on console over here, without knowing any bit of JavaScript, for now we're just going to show you a simple JavaScript line. And we're going to type in alert, and let's say, hi there, exclamation marks. And I press enter. And look at that. We just made the very first website ever made interactive with JavaScript. Now, obviously, this doesn't do anything, but hopefully this shows you where we were before in 1991 to where we are now. Websites that are interactive, full of JavaScript, CSS, and of course, HTML. See you in the next one. Bye-bye. And welcome back to the second web developer fundamental. Another very important aspect of being a web developer, and that is the fact that we have multiple web browsers. Now, if you remember, Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, created it because we needed a standard way to share documents amongst each other. And through HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we're able to read these files and actually have beautiful websites. Now, when we send these files over, each of these browsers read the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and lay out the web page for us. But as you can see, each one of them is owned by a company and is a different browser. So that means they all have to agree on how they're going to read the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Because if they don't all agree, then, well, we need to create different files specific for each browser, because each one of them has a different idea of what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is. And you know what? When the World Wide Web got started, we had something called the browser wars, where each browser was kind of doing its own thing, implemented different things, and we still have that to this day to some extent. There is a governing body which kind of creates these standards now, but it is still a pain point for developers where we need to figure out that whenever we send our files to the web browser, it all looks the same. And that is one of the biggest problems we have as developers, and you'll see tools later on in this course that try to solve that issue. But you'll always encounter this problem where we want to make sure that wherever your browser gets rendered, anybody can see your website. And not only that, we also have mobile phones now that access the internet. We have iPads. So now, not only do we have to worry about different browsers and whether they agree on what code works in each of these files, we also have to make sure that our websites look good on small screens, on big screens, on all sorts of different screens. And that is a very important concept, something that when you get to become a web developer, you'll encounter this problem where you have to test on each device, each browser to make sure everything works. And we'll use some tools that have developed over the years to solve these problems so that it's not as much as a pain point as it is or as it was. All right, one more lesson to go, and then we're going to get coding. See you on the other side. Bye-bye. And welcome back to the final lesson from the history of the web. I wanted to finish things off with this diagram that we've seen before in previous lessons with a few minor differences. And that is, I wanted to show you how web applications were built in the early 2000s. So they were built with technologies that we've come to familiarize ourselves with. We have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but we also had jQuery. And jQuery was a library that allowed JavaScript to be written in a simple, clean way that allowed us not to worry too much about working in one browser, then the other. It created this environment for JavaScript to flourish. But it is an outdated technology and there's better ways of doing things. So it is not used very often and you'll see it less and less in job postings. And then on the back end, we have the LAMP stack. And that stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And in those days, backend developers used PHP to write files that allowed us to have logic on the servers. And then we had Apache. So if you ever use something like HostGator and you had to log into cPanel or any of those very common hosting platforms, most likely they're running Apache server. And what it is, it's a software that really efficiently serves up files. And PHP is a language that it's still being used today, and Facebook actually uses it, but that's because their website was built in the early 2000s. It is now a very unpopular, let's say, language in terms of growth and job opportunities. Then we also had MySQL, which it's still being used, but again, if you're looking to get hired, you want to look for skills that are highly employable, people are looking for them, and there are still very few developers that know it really well. Well, that's what we're learning in this course. In this course, we're going to learn HTML5, CSS3. We're going to learn JavaScript. We're going to learn React, probably the biggest library for JavaScript. And we're going to learn about node servers, Node.js, Express.js. We're going to learn about PostgreSQL and also MongoDB. So we're learning all these things in order for us to build clean, fast, and bug-free web applications so that we can stand on shoulders of giants and create wonderful applications that we're proud of. So get excited. All the theory stuff we're done with. We're going to start coding. We're going to start off with HTML, then get into CSS, and then finally JavaScript and React. And don't worry, we'll get to the back end as well. So I'll see you in the next section. Bye-bye.